The morning Jacob Norwood found the woman half buried in snow. He had been riding fence lines on his ranch outside Kearney, Nebraska, cursing the bitter February wind of 1881 that cut through his coat like it was made of paper. He had almost missed her entirely, might have ridden past if his horse hadn't balked and refused to move forward, ears pinned back in concern at something his rider couldn't yet see. Jacob dismounted, boots crunching through the frozen crust, and that's when he spotted the dark shape against the white landscape. His heart jumped into his throat as he ran forward, dropping to his knees beside what he now realized was a woman, her lips blue, her face pale as death itself. She wore a torn dress that had once been fine quality, now soaked through and frozen in places, and no coat at all. Her long dark hair was matted with ice and snow. "Madam, can you hear me?" Jacob pressed his fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. There it was, faint and slow, but present. She was alive, though he couldn't fathom how. The temperature had dropped well below freezing the night before. He had no idea how long she'd been out here. He didn't waste time with more questions she couldn't answer. Jacob stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and burning with fever despite the cold that had nearly claimed her. The contradiction worried him more than anything. He secured her on his horse, climbing up behind to hold her steady against his chest, and urged the animal into a gallop back toward his ranch house. The 3 miles had never felt longer. Jacob kept one arm wrapped tight around the unconscious woman, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her body even through his coat. She didn't stir once during the ride, didn't make a sound, and he found himself talking to her anyway, saying anything to fill the terrible silence. "You're going to be all right. I've got you now, just hold on. We're almost there." His ranch house came into view, a solid 2-story structure he'd built with his own hands over the past 5 years. Smoke rose from the chimney where he'd banked the fire before leaving that morning. Jacob pulled his horse to a stop outside, dismounted with the woman still in his arms, and kicked the door open. The warmth inside hit him like a wall. He carried her straight to his bedroom, the only room with a proper bed, and laid her down gently. Her skin was an alarming shade of pale beneath the flush of fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Ice crystals still clung to her eyelashes. Jacob had lived alone since coming to Nebraska 5 years ago, building his ranch from nothing, and he'd learned basic doctoring out of necessity. But this was beyond anything he'd dealt with before. The woman needed more help than he could provide, but the nearest doctor was in town, 8 miles away, and the storm that had been threatening all morning was starting to blow in hard. He couldn't risk the journey, not yet. He'd have to do what he could himself and pray it was enough. First things first. The wet clothes had to come off, or she'd never warm up properly. Jacob worked quickly, trying to maintain what dignity he could for this stranger, replacing her frozen dress with one of his own soft flannel shirts that hung to her knees. Her skin was like ice in some places, burning hot in others. He found frostbite on several of her fingers and toes, the skin white and hard. Once she was dry and dressed in warm clothes, Jacob piled every blanket he owned on top of her. He built up the fire in the bedroom's small fireplace until the room was almost stifling. Then he heated water and tried to get some liquid past her cracked, frozen lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but he kept trying, patient and persistent. "Come on now," he murmured, supporting her head with one hand. "Just a little. You need water." She swallowed reflexively, and triumph surged through him. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jacob worked through the afternoon and into the evening, never leaving her side for more than a few minutes at a time. He changed the cold cloths on her forehead, trying to bring the fever down. He massaged her frozen fingers and toes gently, carefully, trying to restore circulation without causing more damage. He got more water into her and later, some weak broth. The storm howled outside, confirming his instinct that traveling to town would have been deadly. Snow pelted the windows, and the wind screamed around the corners of the house. Jacob was grateful for the solid walls he'd built, for the tight construction that kept the warmth inside. As night fell, he pulled a chair close to the bed and settled in to watch over her. In the lamplight, he could see her features more clearly. She was young, probably close to his own 28 years, and would have been beautiful if not for the ravages of exposure and illness. Her face was thin, cheekbones sharp, suggesting she hadn't been eating well even before whatever had landed her in the snow. Who was she? Where had she come from? Jacob studied her, trying to piece together the mystery. Her dress, though ruined, had been expensive. Her hands, despite the calluses he'd noticed, were not the hands of someone who did hard labor every day. A lady, then, or someone who had been. But what was a lady doing alone in a Nebraska snowstorm without even a coat? The questions multiplied, but the woman slept on, locked in whatever darkness the fever had pulled her into. Jacob dozed in his chair, waking every hour to check on her, to add wood to the fire, to coax more water past her lips. The first night passed. Then the second day, with the storm still raging outside. Jacob's world narrowed to the bedroom, to the woman in his bed, to the rhythm of caring for her. He heated more broth, changed her blankets when she sweated through them, monitored her breathing, her color, the dozens of small signs that told him whether she was getting better or worse. The fever raged. Sometimes she thrashed, murmuring words he couldn't understand, and he had to hold her still to keep her from hurting herself. Other times she went terrifyingly still, and he'd press his ear to her chest to make sure her heart was still beating. "You're a fighter," he told her during one of these moments, his voice rough from tiredness. "I can tell, so fight this, come back." The second night was worse than the first. Her fever spiked, and Jacob feared he was losing her. He packed her in cool cloths, then warm ones when she started shivering violently. He prayed, something he hadn't done much of since his parents died, asking whatever God might be listening to spare this stranger's life. Near dawn of the third day, the fever finally broke. Jacob felt it happen, felt the unnatural heat begin to fade from her skin, saw the color start to return to her face. Relief hit him so hard he had to sit down, his legs suddenly weak. She would live. Against all odds, she was going to make it. He allowed himself a few hours of real sleep then, stretched out on the floor beside the bed, too exhausted to make it to the guest room. When he woke, the storm had passed, and weak February sunlight was streaming through the windows. Jacob got stiffly to his feet and looked down at his patient. She was still sleeping, but it was different now. The desperate, feverish quality was gone. This was real rest, healing sleep. Her breathing was deep and even, her color much improved. The frostbite on her fingers and toes was minimal, would likely heal without permanent damage. He went to make coffee and breakfast, moving quietly so as not to disturb her. His body ached from 3 days of sleeping in a chair or on the floor, but his spirit felt light. She was going to be all right. The problem hit him as he was frying bacon. What was he going to do with her when she woke up? He couldn't just send her on her way, not until he knew her story, knew she had somewhere safe to go. But a single man living alone with an unmarried woman, even a sick one, would cause talk. In a small community like the one around Kearney, reputation mattered. Jacob was still mulling this over when he heard a sound from the bedroom. He set down the pan and hurried in to find her stirring, her head moving restlessly on the pillow. "Easy now," he said softly, approaching the bed. "You're safe, you're all right," Her eyes opened. They were green, he noticed with a start, a deep forest green that seemed to look right through him. For a long moment she just stared, confusion and fear warring in her expression. "Where am I?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper, raw from disuse and illness. "My ranch outside Kearney, Nebraska. I'm Jacob Norwood. I found you in the snow 3 days ago. 3 days." She tried to sit up, gasped, and fell back. 3 days, you were in bad shape. Fever, exposure. You've been unconscious the whole time. Jacob poured water from the pitcher and helped her drink. "What's your name?" She swallowed the water gratefully, then met his eyes again. Something in her expression changed, became guarded. Sarah Anderson." "Where are you from, Miss Anderson?" "How did you end up in the snow with no coat?" Sarah looked away, and Jacob saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "I was traveling. There was an accident. The stage overturned in the storm. I tried to walk for help." It was a lie. Jacob knew it instinctively, though he couldn't have said exactly how. But he also saw the fear in her eyes, the way her hands clutched at the blankets, and he decided not to push. "Not yet." "Well, you're safe now. You need rest and food. We can talk more later." Relief crossed her face, followed quickly by confusion. "This is your room, your bed. I have others, don't worry about it. I can't just take your room, I shouldn't even be here, it's not proper." Jacob had known this was coming. He took a breath and made a decision that he'd been circling around for the past hour. "Actually, that's something we need to discuss. You've been here 3 days, Miss Anderson, alone with me, unchaperoned." Sarah's face went white. "Oh God, in a town like Kearney people talk. If word gets out that you stayed here, unmarried, your reputation would be ruined. Mine too, probably. But I was unconscious, dying. I know that, you know that, but will everyone else believe it?" Jacob sat down in the chair beside the bed. "I've been thinking about this." "There's a solution if you're willing." She stared at him. "What solution? When you woke up, you were already my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You can't be serious." "I am. Think about it. If you're my wife, there's no scandal. No shame. You're safe, protected, respectable. But we don't know each other. We're strangers. Strangers who are in a difficult situation." Jacob leaned forward, keeping his voice gentle. "Look, I'm not talking about a real marriage, not right away anyway, just on paper, for appearances. You need somewhere to stay while you recover, and you need protection from whatever had you running." "Yes, I know you were running," he added when she started to protest. "No stage overturned in any storm. I checked while you were sleeping. There's been no report of any accident." Tears welled up in Sarah's green eyes. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand, but first tell me this. If you leave here, where will you go? Do you have family, friends, money?" The tears spilled over, tracking down her pale cheeks. That was answer enough. "I thought so," Jacob said quietly. "So here's what I'm proposing. As far as anyone knows, we got married 3 days ago. That's why you're here. We can make it legal if you want, or just let people think we did. Either way, you'll have a place to stay, food, safety. And time to figure out what comes next. Why would you do this? You don't know me." Jacob considered the question. Why was he doing this? He barely knew himself. "Because I found you dying in the snow and I saved your life. Seems like a waste to save it just to have your reputation destroyed. And because I'm a decent man, Miss Anderson, and this is the decent thing to do." Sarah wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "You're insane." "Probably. Is that a yes?" She laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. "What choice do I have? There's always a choice. But I hope you'll make this one." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Jacob let her look, keeping his expression open and honest. Finally, she nodded. "All right, for now, until I can figure something else out." "Good." Jacob stood. "Then as far as the world is concerned, you're Sarah Norwood now. My wife of 3 days recovering from a bad fever. Can you remember that? I think so. Good. Now you need to eat. I'll bring you some breakfast and then you should rest more. You're not well yet, not by a long shot. He started to leave, but her voice stopped him. Jacob, he turned back. Yes, thank you. I know I haven't told you why I was out there, why I was running, but thank you for not pushing and for this. You'll tell me when you're ready, Jacob said. Now rest. He went back to the kitchen and finished making breakfast, his mind whirling. What had he just done? Offered marriage to a complete stranger, that's what. His friends would think he'd lost his mind. Hell, maybe he had. But when he brought the food back to Sarah and saw the relief in her eyes, the way some of the tension had left her shoulders, he knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever her story was, whatever she was running from, she needed help. And Jacob had never been able to turn his back on someone in need. Over the next few days, a strange sort of routine developed. Sarah's strength returned slowly, and Jacob continued to sleep in the guest room, giving her space and privacy. He brought her meals, helped her when she was strong enough to leave the bed, and maintained a careful, respectful distance. They talked, carefully at first, dancing around the truth of her situation. Jacob told her about his ranch, how he'd come to Nebraska as a young man of 23 with nothing but dreams and determination. He talked about building the house, starting his herd, the hard work and harder winters. Sarah listened, asked questions, and slowly began to relax around him. She told him less about herself, but what she did share painted a picture of a woman who had been trapped. She'd grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a merchant. Her mother had died when she was young. Her father had remarried, and her stepmother had made Sarah's life difficult. She wanted me married off, Sarah said one evening as they sat by the fire in the main room. She was wrapped in blankets, still recovering but much stronger. She had a man picked out, Edmund Hartley. He was older, wealthy, and cruel. So you ran, Jacob said quietly. Sarah nodded. The night before the wedding, I took what little money I had and bought passage on a train heading west. I thought I could disappear, start over. But Edmund's family has connections. I don't know if they're looking for me or not, but I couldn't risk staying in cities. I got off the train in Grand Island and tried to hire a wagon to take me somewhere smaller, somewhere I could hide. What happened? The man I hired was drunk. We made it maybe 10 miles before he passed out and fell off the wagon. The horses spooked and ran. I tried to control them but couldn't. The wagon tipped and I was thrown clear. By the time I got my bearings, the horses were gone and the storm was starting. I tried to walk, but I got lost in the snow. Jacob felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of someone treating her so callously, forcing her into such a desperate situation. This Edmund, do you think he'll come looking? I don't know. His pride was injured, I'm sure. Whether that's enough to make him search or whether he'll just find someone else to marry, I can't say. If he comes here, he won't find Sarah Anderson. He'll find Sarah Norwood, a married woman. That should be the end of it. Sarah looked at him, something soft in her expression. You really meant it, didn't you? This whole arrangement, you're protecting me. That's what a husband does, isn't it? Even a pretend one. Most men wouldn't be so kind. Jacob shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Most men are fools then. A week after Sarah woke, Jacob took his wagon into town for supplies. He'd been putting it off, but they were running low on necessities and he couldn't avoid it forever. Besides, the sooner he established Sarah's presence as his wife, the better. Kearney was a small but growing town with a main street that boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other businesses. Jacob had friends here, people he'd known for years. He wasn't looking forward to the questions. He got them immediately. Sam Cooper, who ran the general store, spotted him the moment he walked in. Jacob, haven't seen you in weeks. Where have you been hiding? Ranch work, Jacob said easily, pulling out his list. Kept me busy. I heard a rumor you had a visitor. That true? Word traveled fast. Jacob had figured someone would have seen smoke from his chimney and drawn conclusions. Not a visitor, my wife. Sam's eyes went wide. Your wife? Since when are you married? About 10 days now. It was quick. Sarah didn't have any family to speak of, and I wasn't getting any younger. Seemed like the right time. Well, I'll be damned. Congratulations, Jacob. When do we get to meet her? Soon. She's been under the weather, needed time to recover from the journey, but she's feeling better now. It was close enough to the truth. Jacob fielded more questions, spun the story he and Sarah had agreed on, and felt relief when Sam finally let him gather his supplies in peace. But as he was loading the wagon, he spotted Tom Winters, one of his nearest neighbors, approaching. Heard you got yourself hitched, Tom said, grinning. Dark horse, aren't you? Seemed like time, Jacob repeated. You know how it is. Can't say I do, never managed to convince a woman to take me on, but good for you. Bring her by sometime. Martha's been itching for more female company out here. I'll do that. The questions continued from several other townspeople, and by the time Jacob headed back to the ranch, he was exhausted from maintaining the story. But it was done. As far as Kearney was concerned, he was a married man. When he got home, he found Sarah in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. She turned when he came in, and he was struck by how different she looked from the half-frozen woman he'd found in the snow. Her color was good, her eyes bright, and she'd braided her dark hair over one shoulder. She wore one of the dresses he'd bought for her in town the week before, a simple blue calico that suited her. You shouldn't be up doing this, Jacob said, setting down the supplies. You're still recovering. I can't just lie in bed forever. I need to start pulling my weight. She gestured at the pot on the stove. It's just stew, nothing fancy. It smells good. Jacob moved to help her, and their hands brushed as they both reached for the same ladle. They froze, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with something Jacob couldn't name. Sarah pulled back first, her cheeks flushing. Sorry, don't be. Jacob cleared his throat. I told people in town about you, about us being married. The story's established now. How did they react? Surprised, mostly, but they bought it. Tom Winters wants us to visit him and his wife sometime. That would be nice. Sarah stirred the stew, not looking at him. Jacob, I've been thinking, we should probably make this legal. The marriage, I mean. Jacob's heart did an odd little skip. What changed your mind? It's safer. If Edmund or his family does come looking, a legal marriage is stronger protection than just people's assumptions. And it's not fair to you to have people thinking you're married when you're not. That could cause problems later. Later, when I leave. When this arrangement ends. If people think we're married but we're not really, there could be complications. Right, later. Jacob hadn't really thought about later, about Sarah leaving. The idea bothered him more than it should have. We'd need to go to the county clerk, get a license. Can we do that? Yes. I'll take you into town when you're feeling stronger. They ate dinner together that night, talking about inconsequential things, but Jacob's mind was on Sarah's suggestion. A legal marriage. It made sense from a practical standpoint. But it also felt like something more, some kind of line being crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Did he mind? Sitting across from Sarah, watching the firelight play over her features, listening to her laugh at something he'd said, Jacob realized he didn't mind at all. In fact, the idea of being legally bound to her felt right in a way he didn't quite understand yet. 2 weeks after finding Sarah in the snow, they made the trip to the county seat to obtain a marriage license. Sarah was nervous, Jacob could tell, but she hid it well behind a calm exterior. They filled out the paperwork, swore before a justice of the peace that they wished to be married, and walked out legally husband and wife. "That's it," Sarah said as they climbed back into the wagon. "We're married. That's it. It seems too simple." Jacob picked up the reins. Most important things are simple. It's people who make them complicated. On the drive back, Sarah was quiet, watching the winter landscape roll past. Snow still covered the ground, but the worst of the cold had passed. Soon it would be spring, time for planting and new beginnings. "Are you all right?" Jacob asked. "I was just thinking how strange life is. A month ago I was in St. Louis, trapped in a nightmare, certain my life was over. Now I'm married to a man I barely know, living on a ranch in Nebraska, and I'm happier than I've been in years. Are you happy?" She looked at him, and the smile on her face was genuine. "I am. Is that wrong, given the circumstances?" "Nothing wrong with being happy." Jacob found himself smiling back. "I'm glad you are." The days began to flow into each other, establishing new patterns and rhythms. Sarah proved to be a hard worker, insisting on doing her share of the housework despite Jacob's protests. She cooked, cleaned, mended his clothes, and tackled tasks with a determination that impressed him. "I'm not useless," she told him when he suggested she rest more. "I may have grown up in a city, but I can learn. Teach me." So he did. Jacob taught her about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the endless work required to keep everything running. Sarah absorbed it all, asked intelligent questions, and slowly began to find her place in this new life. They also began to know each other in the small, intimate ways that married couples do. Jacob learned that Sarah hummed while she cooked, that she was frightened of thunderstorms, that she had a sharp wit and sharper tongue when something annoyed her. Sarah learned that Jacob rose before dawn every day, that he had a soft spot for the runt animals in his herds, that despite his gruff exterior, he was one of the kindest men she'd ever met. The attraction between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. Jacob found himself watching Sarah when she wasn't looking, noticing the graceful way she moved, the sound of her laugh, the quick flash of her smile. He thought about her constantly, wondered what she was thinking, wished he had the right to touch her the way a real husband would. Sarah felt it too. She caught herself staring at Jacob sometimes, admiring the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the solid dependability of his presence. She felt safe with him, safer than she'd ever felt with anyone, and that safety was slowly transforming into something deeper. But neither of them spoke of it. The marriage was supposed to be temporary, a practical arrangement to protect them both. Acknowledging the feelings developing between them would complicate everything. Spring arrived in earnest, and with it came more work. Jacob hired 2 ranch hands, young men from town who needed employment. Sarah met them with polite friendliness, establishing herself as the lady of the house with quiet confidence. "Your wife's a good woman," one of the hands, Billy, told Jacob one afternoon. "You're a lucky man." "I know it," Jacob replied, and realized he meant it. They settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Sarah started a vegetable garden, planting seeds with careful precision. She wrote away for chickens and started a small flock. She made curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors, turning Jacob's functional house into a real home. And through it all, the unspoken feelings continued to build. They danced around each other, careful not to touch too much, not to let their eyes meet for too long, both afraid of what might happen if they acknowledged what was growing between them. The breaking point came in late April, 2 months after Jacob had found Sarah in the snow. A spring storm rolled in, fierce and sudden, with crashing thunder and lightning that turned the sky white. Sarah, who had been hanging laundry, ran inside just as the rain started, her face pale with fear. Jacob was in the barn, but he saw her run for the house and followed, concerned. He found her in their bedroom, the one she still used while he took the guest room, sitting on the bed with her hands over her ears, shaking. "Sarah," he approached carefully. "It's all right, it's just a storm." "I know, I'm sorry, I know it's foolish, but I can't help it." "It's not foolish." Jacob sat down beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Everyone's afraid of something." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the house. Sarah gasped and, without thinking, grabbed for Jacob's hand. He held on, lacing his fingers through hers. "I've got you. You're safe." "It's stupid. I should be braver." "You're the bravest person I know. You left everything you knew to escape a terrible situation. You survived dying in the snow. You started a whole new life. That's brave." Sarah looked up at him, her green eyes wide and frightened, but also something else, something that made Jacob's breath catch. "You make me feel brave." "Sarah," he whispered, and then somehow they were kissing, tentative at first but quickly deepening into something more. Sarah's arms came up around his neck, and Jacob pulled her close, finally giving in to the feelings he'd been fighting for weeks. The kiss broke and they stared at each other, both breathing hard. "We shouldn't," Sarah said, but she didn't pull away. "I know. This was supposed to be temporary, pretend." "I know that too, Jacob. I don't want it to be pretend anymore." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Jacob cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes. "Are you sure? This isn't gratitude talking or fear of the storm, I'm sure. I've been sure for weeks. I love you, Jacob. I don't know how it happened so fast, but I do." Joy surged through him, so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too. God help me, I've loved you almost from the beginning. I just didn't want to push you into something you didn't want. I want this. I want you. I want this marriage to be real." Jacob kissed her again, pouring everything he felt into it. The storm raged outside, but inside, in this room, everything was warm and safe and perfect. They made love for the first time as the thunder rolled and the rain poured down, finally claiming each other in truth as well as name. Afterward, Sarah lay in Jacob's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured. "Neither did I." Jacob stroked her hair, marveling at how right this felt. "I'd given up on the idea of marriage, of having a family. Then I found you. You saved me. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too. I just didn't know I needed saving until you came along." They stayed like that, wrapped around each other as the storm gradually passed. When they finally emerged from the bedroom hours later, everything had changed. The careful distance was gone, replaced by the easy intimacy of a couple truly in love. The next few months were some of the happiest of Jacob's life. He and Sarah worked the ranch together, building something real and lasting. She proved to have a natural way with animals, particularly the horses, and took over much of their care. Her garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables through the summer. They hosted dinner with Tom Winters and his wife Martha, and Sarah charmed them both with her wit and warmth. Word spread that the Norwoods were good people, their marriage solid, and they became a respected part of the community. In June, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob over dinner one evening, her face glowing with happiness and nervousness. "I know we didn't plan for this. I know the marriage was supposed to be different." Jacob got up, came around the table, and pulled her into his arms. "This is the best news you could have given me. I love you, Sarah. This child will be loved. We're a family now. A real family." Sarah cried, happy tears this time, and Jacob held her close, overwhelmed with gratitude for the chain of events that had brought them together. If he hadn't gone riding that particular morning, if his horse hadn't balked, if he'd been even 5 minutes later, Sarah would have died in the snow. Instead, she was here, alive and healthy and carrying his child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah bloomed, growing rounder and more beautiful with each passing week. Jacob became ridiculously overprotective, fussing over her constantly until she finally put her foot down. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Let me live my life. I just want you safe. I am safe. I'm safer than I've ever been. Because of you." Their son was born in February of 1882, almost exactly a year after Jacob had found Sarah in the snow. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the midwife from town, and Jacob spent the hours pacing and praying, terrified of losing the woman he loved. But Sarah was strong, and when he finally heard his son's first cry, relief and joy crashed over him in equal measure. The midwife brought him in, and he saw Sarah, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Jacob approached carefully, almost afraid to breathe. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn out to be brown like his father's. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. Jacob thought about it, looking at his wife and son, his entire world contained in this room. "James. After my father. James Norwood. I like it." The baby squirmed and let out a lusty wail, and Jacob laughed, the sound surprising him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this happy, this complete. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James proved to have healthy lungs and used them frequently, especially at night. Jacob and Sarah took turns walking him, soothing him, marveling at every tiny change. "I can't believe he's ours," Sarah said one night, watching James sleep in his cradle. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that this is real, that I'm not going to wake up back in St. Louis about to marry Edmund." "It's real," Jacob assured her, pulling her close. "You're here. We're here. This is our life." As James grew, so did the ranch. Jacob expanded his herd, bought more land, hired more hands. Sarah managed the house with skill and efficiency, raising their son while also contributing to the ranch work. They were partners in every sense, working together toward common goals. When James was 6 months old, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Jacob was out checking the south pasture, so Sarah answered the door, James on her hip. The man was well-dressed, with cold eyes and an arrogant bearing. "I'm looking for Sarah Anderson," he said without preamble. Sarah's blood ran cold, but she kept her face neutral. "There's no one here by that name. I'm Sarah Norwood." The man studied her, his eyes narrowing. "You look like her. I have a photograph. Miss Anderson disappeared over a year ago. She was engaged to my brother, Edmund Hartley. He's been looking for her. As I said, I'm not who you're looking for. I've been married for over a year. This is my son." Sarah shifted James slightly, letting the stranger see him clearly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Edmund will pay handsomely for information about Miss Anderson's whereabouts. Then I suggest you keep looking elsewhere. Good day." Sarah closed the door in his face, her heart pounding. She watched through the window as the man stood there for a long moment, then finally mounted his horse and rode away. But she knew this wasn't over. Edmund or his family had found her trail. They would be back. When Jacob returned that evening, she told him everything. He listened, his face growing darker with each word. "They can't touch you," he said firmly. "You're my wife, legally married, they have no claim. But what if they make trouble? What if they say I stole something or accuse me of breaking a contract? Then we'll fight them. Sarah, look at me." Jacob waited until she met his eyes. "I won't let anyone take you away, not Edmund, not his family, not anyone. You're mine and I protect what's mine." "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if they hurt you? Or James, I couldn't bear it. They won't, but we should be prepared just in case. Tomorrow, I'll go to town and talk to the sheriff, let him know what's going on. We'll make sure all our legal documents are in order, and I'll spread the word to the neighbors to be on the lookout for strangers." He did exactly as he promised. The sheriff, a man named Dan Miller whom Jacob had known for years, listened to the story and assured them he'd keep an eye out. "A man can't just come in and claim another man's wife. That's kidnapping, and I won't stand for it in my county." The neighbors rallied around them as well. Tom Winters promised to ride over daily to check on them. Martha insisted Sarah and James come stay with her any time Jacob had to be away. The community closed ranks, protecting their own. For a week, nothing happened. Then 2 weeks. A month passed, and the tension gradually eased. Perhaps the Hartley family had given up. Perhaps they'd believed Sarah when she said she was married with a child. Either way, no one else came looking for her. Life returned to normal. James grew and thrived, learning to sit up, then crawl, then pull himself up on furniture. Sarah and Jacob watched every milestone with pride and joy. They made love in the quiet hours after James was asleep, their passion deepened by the love and trust they'd built. On the first anniversary of the day, Jacob found Sarah in the snow. He gave her a gift. It was a necklace, simple but beautiful, with a small pendant in the shape of a snowflake. "So you'll always remember," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "Remember almost dying," Sarah teased. "Remember that sometimes the worst days lead to the best things. If you hadn't been in that snow, we never would have met. I never would have known what it's like to love someone like I love you." Sarah kissed him, slow and sweet. "I remember. Every day I'm grateful, for you, for James, for this life. You gave me everything, Jacob. You gave me just as much. More, probably. You turned a house into a home. You gave me a family. You made me happier than I ever imagined I could be." They held each other as James played on the floor nearby, a perfect moment of contentment and peace. Whatever trials had come before, whatever might come in the future, they would face it together. Time passed in the way it does when life is good. James grew into a sturdy toddler, then a rambunctious little boy. Sarah became pregnant again when James was 2, and this time she gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Emma. The house was chaos and noise and love, exactly what Jacob had always dreamed of. The ranch prospered. Jacob's herd grew to one of the largest in the county. He bought adjoining land when it became available, expanding his operation. Sarah's garden produced abundance, and she started selling eggs and vegetables in town, bringing in additional income. They never heard from the Hartley family again. Edmund, they eventually learned through mutual acquaintances, had married someone else within 6 months of Sarah's disappearance. Whatever obsession he'd had with her had been purely about pride and possession, not love. When she was gone long enough, he'd simply moved on to another victim. Sarah felt only relief and pity for whoever the poor woman was. But mostly she felt grateful. Grateful for her escape, for her life, for her husband and children. She woke up every morning in Jacob's arms, watched her children grow, and marveled at how different her life could have been. On a warm summer evening when James was 5 and the twins were 3, the whole family sat on the porch watching the sunset. James was showing off the rope tricks Jacob had taught him, and the girls were chasing fireflies in the yard. Sarah leaned against Jacob's shoulder, utterly content. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you'd married Edmund?" Jacob asked quietly. "Never," Sarah said firmly. "That's not my life, this is. You, the children, the ranch. This is everything I was meant to be. No regrets. Not a single one. You." Jacob kissed the top of her head. "My only regret is that I didn't find you sooner." They sat together as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, listening to their children's laughter, feeling the easy intimacy of two people who had built a life together from nothing. Sarah thought about that woman in the snow, dying and desperate, not knowing that salvation was riding toward her on a horse. She thought about waking up 3 days later to find herself married to a stranger and how terrified she'd been. If someone had told her then that she would fall deeply, completely, irrevocably in love with that stranger, she wouldn't have believed them. If they'd told her she would bear his children, build a home with him, and be happier than she'd ever imagined possible, she would have thought them insane. But it had all come true. Every impossible thing. "Jacob," she said softly. "Yes, thank you for finding me that day, for saving me, for everything. Thank you for waking up and choosing to stay, for giving me a family, for loving me. Always," Sarah promised. "I'll love you always." And she did. Through the years that followed, through the challenges and triumphs, through the times of hardship and the times of plenty, Sarah and Jacob loved each other with a steady, enduring devotion that only grew stronger with time. They added 2 more children to their family, another son named Daniel and a daughter named Grace. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in Nebraska. James grew up to be a fine rancher himself, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations. The twins were inseparable, bright and curious and beautiful. Daniel and Grace were the babies, spoiled by their older siblings and adored by their parents. Sarah became a pillar of the community, known for her kindness and generosity. She helped new settlers, taught other women her gardening and preserving techniques, and was always ready with a meal or a sympathetic ear for anyone in need. Jacob served on the town council, helping guide Kearney through its growing years. They celebrated anniversaries, both the official one marking their legal marriage and the unofficial one marking the day Jacob found Sarah in the snow. That day was always special, a reminder of how fragile life could be and how precious the love they'd found was. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they took a rare trip alone, leaving the children with Martha and Tom Winters for a weekend. They rode out to the place where Jacob had found Sarah, a spot they'd never visited together. The land looked different in spring, green and alive, with no trace of the snow that had nearly claimed Sarah's life. "I can't even imagine it anymore," Sarah said, looking around. "I can't picture myself here dying. It feels like a story about someone else." "You're a different person now than you were then. So are you. We've grown up together, haven't we? Grown into the people we were meant to be." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love the person you've become, but I loved the woman I found in the snow too. Scared and running, but brave enough to keep fighting even when it seemed hopeless. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what you have to do despite the fear. You've always been brave, Sarah, from that first day to this one." They made love there in the grass, under the wide Nebraska sky, reaffirming the vows they'd made years ago. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms, talking about their children, their plans for the ranch, the future they were building together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had found me that day?" Sarah asked. "Never. It was supposed to be me. Some things are just meant to be." "I believe that. I think we were meant to find each other one way or another, maybe not in the snow, maybe not in Nebraska. But somewhere, somehow, we would have met and fallen in love. Absolutely. I'd fall in love with you in any lifetime, Jacob Norwood." Years continued to pass. They celebrated as their children grew up, fell in love themselves, and started families of their own. James married a sweet girl from town named Alice, and they settled on a portion of the ranch Jacob deeded to them. The twins both married as well, Alina to a banker and Emma to a teacher. Daniel followed his father into ranching, while Grace surprised everyone by becoming a teacher herself. Sarah and Jacob became grandparents and then great-grandparents. Their hair turned gray, their bodies moved slower, but their love never diminished. They still sat on the porch every evening watching the sunset. They still held hands. They still looked at each other with the same devotion they'd had decades ago, on a spring evening much like the one when Jacob had found Sarah in the snow. The two of them sat in their favorite rocking chairs, wrapped in blankets against the cool air. They were in their 70s now, their children and grandchildren scattered but nearby, the ranch still operating under James's capable management. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice soft with age but still strong. "About what? About how lucky we've been, how much life we've lived, how many memories we've made." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Best 47 years of my life. Mine too. I want you to know something, Jacob. If I had to do it all over again, make all the same choices, suffer all the same fears and hardships just to end up here with you, I'd do it in a heartbeat." "So would I. Finding you was the best thing I ever did. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the familiar landscape turn gold in the setting sun. Somewhere in the house behind them they could hear voices, their grandchildren visiting for Sunday dinner, continuing the traditions Sarah and Jacob had established decades ago. "You remember the day we met?" Sarah asked. "Really met, I mean, when I woke up. Every detail. You opened those green eyes and looked at me like I was crazy. I thought you were, a stranger telling me I was his wife. It was insane, but you agreed. I didn't have much choice, but I'm glad I did. Best decision I ever made, even if I didn't know it at the time." Jacob raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I knew, I think. The moment I saw you in the snow, something in me recognized you, knew you were important, knew I had to save you. You did save me, in every way possible." They rocked gently, the rhythmic creak of the chairs a familiar sound. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied in the pasture. The sounds of the ranch, the sounds of home. "I love you, Sarah Norwood." "I love you too, Jacob, always have, always will." The sun set completely, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah and Jacob sat together, hands clasped, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd built. A life that had started with a desperate woman in the snow and a cowboy brave enough to do the right thing. A life that had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. A love story that had endured through decades and would continue in the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. Inside the house, their family gathered around the dinner table, continuing traditions and making memories of their own. Outside, Sarah and Jacob remained on the porch, reluctant to go in just yet, savoring these quiet moments together. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Sarah asked. "When I was still unconscious," Jacob thought back, surprised she knew. "You heard that, some of it. You told me to fight, to come back. I did. I was terrified you wouldn't. I fought because of you. Even in the darkness, I heard your voice and knew I couldn't give up. You gave me a reason to live when I'd almost given up. You gave me a reason too. I didn't realize how lonely I'd been until you were there, how empty my life was until you filled it." They stood slowly, helping each other up with the ease of long practice. Jacob kept his arm around Sarah's waist as they walked inside, past the noise and warmth of their family, to their bedroom. The same bedroom where Sarah had woken up all those years ago, confused and frightened and convinced her life was over. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day in the snow. It had begun. Everything before had been prologue, leading her to this place, this man, this beautiful life they'd created together. As they prepared for bed that night, moving around each other with the familiarity of decades, Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was old now, her face lined, her hair silver. But her eyes were still the same green they'd been at 23, and they still sparkled when she looked at her husband. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and they looked at their reflection together. "Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he murmured. "You need spectacles. I need nothing but you, never have, never will." Sarah turned in his arms and kissed him, a soft kiss full of affection and love and the comfort of knowing someone completely. They climbed into bed, Sarah curling into Jacob's arms the way she had for 47 years. "Good night, my love," Jacob whispered. "Good night. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for letting me." They drifted off to sleep together, two souls who had found each other against all odds, built a life against all challenges, and loved each other through all circumstances. The snow that had nearly killed Sarah had instead brought her the greatest gift of her life. The cowboy who had found her fevered and dying had become her everything, her partner, her love, her home. And 3 days after he'd found her, when she'd woken as his wife, neither of them had known that the pretend marriage would become the realest, truest thing in both their lives. They couldn't have known that the arrangement born of necessity and desperation would transform into a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of choosing kindness, of taking chances, of opening your heart even when it seems impossible. But that's exactly what had happened. And as Sarah and Jacob slept peacefully in each other's arms, surrounded by the life and love they'd built, the stars shone bright over the Nebraska plains, keeping watch over a family that had started with a man, a woman, and a snowstorm that had changed everything. Their story, which had begun with such unlikely circumstances, with fear and uncertainty, and a marriage that was supposed to be temporary, had become a legacy. Their children told their children about the grandfather who saved a dying woman in the snow, about the grandmother who woke up married to a stranger and chose to stay, about the love that had grown from the most improbable of beginnings into something unshakable and eternal. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best things, about how love can bloom even in the coldest winter, even between two people who had every reason to remain strangers, but instead chose to become partners, lovers, and finally, soulmates. And it was a story that proved that sometimes, when you save someone's life, they save yours right back. Jacob had pulled Sarah from the snow and nursed her through fever, but she had pulled him from loneliness and given him purpose. They had saved each other in all the ways that mattered, and in doing so, had created something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after they were gone. The Nebraska winter that had nearly claimed Sarah's life had instead given her everything she'd ever dreamed of. And the cowboy who had almost ridden past that day had found the love of his life lying in the snow, waiting for him to be brave enough to stop and look closer. It was, all of them agreed, the best kind of story, the kind that was true.